Good morning. Thank you for joining today's webinar, which is meant for the SPOR application programming interface. Before we start the session, please allow me some housekeeping notes. Please note that today's session is being recorded and will be made available through EMA corporate website and YouTube channel. While we are broadcasting, participants can interact with us using the interaction tool Slido to ask us questions. Interaction with Slido is voluntary, and you can still opt to remain anonymous. If you do provide us your personal name and details, you are hereby consenting to the processing of your personal data as explained in EMA Data Privacy Statement for Slido. So, as I mentioned, we are broadcasting, but you can interact with us throughout the session. And to do so, you should go to slido.com and apply the code that you see there and the code that you will see at the bottom of each of the slides throughout the presentation to send us questions. Please look at the questions that may have been raised previously by other participants and send or vote for the question that you would like to see answered, as this will increase the likelihood for it to be addressed at the end. Throughout the session, we will have some colleagues in the back end who will be doing their best efforts to answer to every question in writing. And at the end, EMA presenters will address the questions that have not been addressed and have received the top voted by the participants. I'm afraid that due to the high volume of questions, sometimes it is not possible for us to address each and every question, or sometimes we may not have the right colleague today present that would be in possession of the knowledge to support you. Unanswered questions will be reviewed at the end of these sessions, and the most relevant questions we will try to fish out and include in our frequently asked question document that is available in the SPOR portal. We may ask you to raise specific questions to us if they relate to issues and cases that we need further details, and to do so, you may be asked to send us a ticket via service desk so that we can track it, investigate it, and indeed assign it to the most relevant colleague that can support you. Thank you. Next. Last, these presentations, the one that you will see today, is already available at EMA Events webpage. So if you go there, you can download the PowerPoint yourself, and we will publish an updated the version also in the SPOR portal in the Documents section. The recordings will be made available through EMA Events page where you found the information on this webinar, as well as YouTube channel. But please bear with us. Don't go looking for the recordings today. It still takes us a few days to process them. If you want to receive these recordings and the presentations via email, there is a dedicated Slido code that you should link in and send us your email details so that we can email them after the event. But then again, please bear with us. We hope to do this once we complete the series of webinars. So having said that, I would now like to hand over to you, to the presenters today. We have with us our technical architects. We have Andre Ido and Angel Sempere, and they will lead you through the details of the SPOR application programming interface. So this is a technical session. Make the most of it, and see you at the end.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. Well, today, a colleague of us, Adrian, cannot join, so Andre is participating on his place. We'll be talking about the SPOR API. This is the last webinar of a series of webinars that has happened during the whole week. We hope you have enjoyed the rest of them. This is probably slightly bit different because it's a technical one. It's intended to IT people implementing your local processes or systems. Of course, if you are not from an IT background or profile, but you are still attending because you want to know what's available under the SPOR platform, you are more than welcome. We will try to give you some guidelines at the beginning of the presentation. So if you are interested to know a bit more, you can jump in and just do some little tries, and also eventually join and get the SPOR data with your experiments. So what we'll be discussing today, it's a bit of a great overview on what's available in the SPOR API. We have live RMS and OMS, so the referentials and organizations management systems. We will extend more on the processes that are needed to get the API access for them, and we'll have a set of demos prepared to show you how easy it is to retrieve the data, and a little bit of a big overview on the possibilities on the different filters, etc. you can apply. And we also want to give a bit of context on where we are in the development of the platform. What are our plans for the near future, for the long term, and also what have we done in the last months to improve the reliability of the service. This is the agenda for today. So first, if you are not familiar with what is an API, we'll give a little bit of an overview. Excuses for the rest that are very aware of what it is. But yeah, the audience is very diverse, or it usually is. We'll explain you how to request the access, how we work with the support. I'll talk a little bit about the API with more concretion on what are the operations available, show them, and then, as we said, talk about the news. We have by the end a little bit of a quiz to try to get to know if you have understood everything correctly, and we'll go to the questions. So any question you could have, please go to Slido, log in there, register, and write the question while you have the question. Don't wait till the end. And my colleague Andre, while we are here developing it, will try to answer. If not, we'll pick them at the end as much as we could, as our colleague mentioned at the beginning. Let's get started. So why are we using an API? No? What's an API from the beginning? An API is, as defined by Wikipedia, it's a set of routines, protocols, or tools for building software applications. But it's, I think, most interesting the second part. It expresses a software component in terms of operations, inputs, outputs, and underlying types. So an API is what let us make a software component, a little bit of a black box, and then it will describe what it takes as an input, what do you expect as an output, and then you can connect to it and you can use those operations that it's offering. For example, no, we will have a little server having a calculator. We could make a little API, and then the inputs would be the operations we want to calculate. The outputs could be the solution or the answer to these operations, or even if it would be a very advanced service, it could have a graph of a function, etc. APIs are not necessarily only bounded to the internet protocol, so to servers, to clients, etc. APIs are everywhere. For example, when you are using a navigation app in your phone, the GPS of the phone has an API, and then the programmer of this application has adopted this API to read the GPS data and then show it in the map. So APIs it's a very extensive concept. We are using web APIs here at SPOR. What is not an API? Well, I will start by the last one. So some people think it's an active product ingredient. That's also an API, but yeah, not in this scope, unfortunately. Here we're talking about computers and machine-to-machine integration. So it's not something you install. It's not a process that automates the human activities. Of course, you can build software that talks to APIs, and that might automate human activities. But then you need to build this software component or this program that will make use of all these available APIs, and then make a series of calls, get the answers, transform them, and then automate those activities. It's also nothing to do with NCAs and EMA. Of course, we expose, for example, this SPOR API, and an NCA can call it this API, but it's not necessarily an end-to-end communication between NCIs and EMA. So when we are talking about this black box with inputs, outputs, and types, what does it mean? This black box is a software component that we have hosted in our servers in EMA. The operations that we are allowing the consumers of this API are search, for example, when you search for organizations or when you search for terms, read when you want to then get this information that you are searching on. So you search a list of organizations, then you want to know the locations of this organization, then you can read that. And then write, it's a special case we have here. So because you can submit change requests, you cannot write directly to what we have here, but you can suggest a change that will be picked by the business team and will be analyzed. And if the suggestion is correct, then of course it will be included in the final, in the master database. The inputs, as we said, are, for example, search terms, outputs, documents, metadata, for example, means that when one organization was last updated, that will be a metadata. It's not data of the organization itself, but it's data that is valuable for the system, no? For the system-to-system integration. And what's a type? So a type is specifying what shape has this input that you send to one of these software components. For example, here a type could be a substance, a product. They are very complex types from a high level, because this is a very high level API. But you have to imagine that if you are synchronizing again your organizations, and organization is a data type, it has a location, it has the location has addresses, it might have a name, it might have many items. This object, then it's a type. Why should you use an API? Well, APIs are good for machine to machine, as we said. So a program on one side, a program on the other side, and then the communication that's established in between them. You can, depending on the type of service, you have different types of business objects. So they are represented in a structured way that for a programmer, it's easier to read and to store in a local database, or to add to any process that you as a consumer will need. For example, if you are doing some applications and then you have to put their organization data, we deliver the organization data in a way that you can later on structure it in your own document easily, or at least that's the intention. Why is good is because APIs are not intended to be used by humans, and that means that, for example, we have the opportunity to, or we give you the opportunity to download all the organizations at once in a big chunk. So when you are doing, I don't know, you are starting from fresh your own local database, your local copy of OMS, you can just in one call retrieve everything and then process it, and then you have a copy of it. But what do you do later? No, when you have this there, for example, you want to know what changed every 4 hours. So this is also something that the API is allowing you. It's allowing you to request small chunks of data. And as soon as the changes are available, then you can be retrieving them and incorporating them to your database, so it's up to date. And as we said, they are machine oriented, but often, or what is the take of the industry now is that they should be human readable, because there's a lot of non-hardcore technical uses of these APIs, and then in a business process management engine or in a low-code integration, you can make those requests to APIs, and then you can, as a user, you can still read the content. So you can read and find the address of an organization or a location of it without needing to translate from numbers to text. No, it's already readable. Also, another use case that we offer, for example, is that you can get an export that is not easily readable by the eye, but it can be easily imported in Excel, no? And then you can make your operations there. It's called a CSV export. So I think this should give you a good overview of what an API is. If you still have doubts, here in the presentation, there are linked a couple of articles which take 5 minutes each to read. They have everyday examples of what's an API, and they are very didactic, so please. We will use later on in the demos an application, free application called Postman. It's one of the most popular applications that can be used to interact with APIs. You can, of course, for a subset of the applications, use just a web browser, and you can still interact with APIs. But when you want to explore a bit more, then you need to parameterize more the calls you do, or you need to use certain type of authentication, for example, then you can use Postman for that. If you want to start experimenting with APIs, we have linked here 3 examples of different complexity. So you can download your Postman and then get funny doc facts from the first link there. It's just like a request, you get a fact every time, random. Second one, you have a dictionary, so you can then explore what happens if I put a parameter. This parameter will be the word I want to look in the dictionary. And then here we are, as you know, we are based in Amsterdam. So the Rijksmuseum of Netherlands has an API where you can make very complex queries. For example, you can get paintings that have certain colors or that they are painted with certain type of paint or in different materials, etc. So then there's plenty of free APIs. A classic example is weather APIs. This is where you can check what will be the weather next week, and then try to experiment and try to play a bit to get more comfortable requesting APIs. Then you can join, read the documentation of SPOR, and start querying SPOR API. What's a user? A user is a user of EMA, someone with an EMA account. And for that, you need to register in the EMH account management portal. We will open it later to show how it looks like, but you shall know that you have to be registered and you have to be linked to an organization. So if an organization, your organization is already there, you can just apply to be linked to it. If not, you will have to send one of those change requests for the organization to be included in the system, and then later on be linked to it. The protocol that we are using is HTTPS, secure HTTP, with basic authentication. That means username, password. The representations of the data are either XML, which is the default, but you can specify, and we'll show in the demos, and you can get JSON, which is often preferred by developers to implement applications. Or maybe if you are getting a big export of data that you want to later on work with in your Excel, you can get a zip CSV. And then we are using RESTful web services, which is the main standard in the industry these days. What about the versions of SPOR? There's version 1 and there's version 2. Version 1 is the one that is live already. It's RMS and OMS. It's about referentials, so that means lists and terms. And it's about organizations, that means organizations and locations. They have custom-made definition of the objects, so of these outputs that we spoke before, of these types. And this is what is live now and for many years already, and what we will be developing more here. What's to come is the version 2, which will be making use of FHIR, and it will be for SMS and PMS, which are the substances and product management systems. And FHIR is a standard, international standard used by many agencies, and not only agencies, but also healthcare providers and etc. around the globe. So this is why the EMA has decided to use this format for these systems. These later on will show in the roadmap when they will be available, but yeah, as of now, they are not available for the general public. To give you an idea, we are having around 400,000 API calls in 24 hours. There you have a breakdown on what it goes where. We have 165 accounts that are doing this machine-to-machine integration, so using the API to the full extent. And then we have almost 70K of users which are using the web portal and querying the data, which is also available there. There are different periods where the system is most busy. We are doing improvements in the system, so this is becoming less relevant, but it's still good for you to know that if you want to make big sinks of data, it's good to avoid these busiest periods that are marked here. So let's get on the details on how to request access to the SPOR API. Here we have a list of resources and links that it would be very useful for you when you want to obtain the access to the SPOR API. I will show, for example, where to get them at the moment. So basically, we have a portal. This portal can allow you to browse the information even with an account, without an account. So it's fully available to all the public. In this portal, we are hosting also the documents that you have to read. This presentation, for example, will be hosted there. There's a API specification there. There's technical documents that if you are a very advanced user, you could use. For example, there's a complete definition of the API in a JSON format. There's the account management portal that we mentioned before, where you have to register beforehand. This is your initial gateway to any EMA service. And then we have the support portal here, where when you have some incident, for example, you can go there and talk to our service desk team. When you want to register your account, you also have to come here and apply for it, etc. So let's take a quick look to the webpage initially. This is how it looks like. If you see, this is the URL that it's linked there. And then under organizations or referentials, when you click here, this page will load. You have here the option to go to the documents. And you'll be able to browse very useful resources here, which contain the webinars recorded, the presentations, some information about the data that it's inside there, and also their technical resources. And here, what I would like to remark is that we have the API specification document and integration patterns. There's some samples as well if you need them. And yeah, there's some more in-depth documentation that initially is not needed for you, but of course is there. If you have a full integration, it might be very useful. So please read here all the guidelines that I mentioned in the presentation. And that should be good to go and register. You can self-register in a test environment and also in a production environment. We'll develop on this in a bit, but it's very simple. The URL mentioned in the presentation, just create an account, self-registration form, and then here, completing your data, you have an EMA account. It's as simple as that. Here, we're back on track. So as we said, you first have to have a user which has SPOR access. That means self-register on the EMA account management portal. And here, the second step is very similar, self-register using the EMA account management portal, but there's a difference. First, you have to register in the production portal. That's where the production, the good data is. UAT is a test environment where you have to make some tests, or of course, you can test your whole implementation using this UAT environment. So you need two accounts, one in the production environment, one in the UAT environment. And then you have to fulfill a form. When you are requesting the access, this form has to be submitted to the service desk, which was mentioned before. Then EMA will process your request. They will then ask for certain test cases that you need to provide. And then once you have returned those test cases, then EMA will approve your account, and then you will have API access to production environment. So just to recap, it looks complex, but it's not that complex. There's two environments, the test environment and the production environment. First, you must register in the test environment. This will allow you to make your own tests and to complete form with questions from EMA. Then you have to return this in the service desk to EMA, and then EMA will analyze your form and then approve your production account. So by registering the test environment and opening a service desk ticket, you will get immediately access to the test data. To get access to the production data, you have to complete those cases that you can complete with the test environment. I hope it's sufficiently clear. If not, please come back to the presentation and just read the flow, bearing in mind that there's two environments and that you have to complete some test cases. This is a bit more of development on what we spoke before. You can, of course, it's if you are intending to get API access to SPOR, just read carefully, because there are some instructions that will facilitate or speed up much more your registration process. The documents that you need to fill up. So, for example, the SPOR API access request form, or the test case evidence, they are hosted in the SPOR page that I mentioned before. And to raise a request in the service desk, I will show you quickly now how to do that. So here, this is the service desk page. This is the link that is written in the presentation. And then it's as simple as going to applications. Then here you have SPOR. And then you can request SPOR API services here. So here, this is the entry point for the service desk. Here you will initiate your request. You can upload these documents that were mentioned before. And of course, if you need further questions or you are a bit lost in the process, don't hesitate to just open this request, and then the service desk team will guide you through the right process. So, how do we work? How is this service desk team working, and how it works internally when there's a question or an incident or a request for the team? We are the SPOR support team. So the SPOR support team has two shades. One is the IT support. So when there's some technicality that is not working well, your request or your incident will go there. You open it in this portal that we showed in the EMA service desk portal. In the different options are under SPOR application there. And then, for example, let's say even that you have been granted access to the API, you cannot retrieve anything. And you can there open an incident and you go to the IT support team. But for example, maybe you notice that the data you are retrieving is not entirely correct, or there's some other problem with the content itself, then this ticket will go to the business support team, and then they will analyze the data and give you either an explanation or fix the data. There's a single entry point, is the service desk portal that we've mentioned. And it's a single entry point for all stakeholders and all types of questions or incidents you might want to report. We are constantly checking the health of the system. We are acting when there's anything that is not following the metrics that we like to see to keep it healthy as much as possible. We are, of course, doing perfecting maintenance, so the system it's evolving. It's not a static system, and then we commit to answer to your queries or to your incidents immediately when it's within working hours. Outside of that, as soon as possible, depending on the service. It could take a bit longer if it's in the evenings, but eventually you should expect an answer at the beginning of the next working day at max. If there's an incident in the platform and we think that is going to take more than 4 hours to be fixed, we will publish in this portal that we showed before the case. So when you go to maybe report an incident because you cannot access to your account, you are aware that it's a global incident, that is not a particular incident of your account. So you can just follow the guideline that is expressed there, and then the good news of this is, like in the last months, and if you are SPOR API users for some time, let's say for a couple of years, you probably have noticed that the system is much more stable, because we are finishing important implementations that my colleague Andrei will brief you later on. And we've been able, there were only a couple of incidents and we were able to come back in less than 1 hour. So that means that the service is online and you can continue with your processes without having to worry to stop or to be held by that. Just to show you briefly where those things are published, if we go back to the page that I showed before, here is in applications SPOR where you will make your request, but here you can have an overview of the current statuses of the whole EMA system. So if we're planning some activity, big activity in SPOR, you will see it here ahead of on time. And if there's some incident, then you will see it in this section here. Now, I've shown before as well the portal with all the documents. Here we are just reminding what's useful of it to be hands-on on the SPOR API. Please take a look to the slides later that will be hosted in that same page. And now let's get into the specifics of the API. So we have a whole specification, which is a document expressing all the data types, inputs that we expect, all the outputs that you can get, and how to navigate through them. We have an XSD scheme that you can import with some libraries into your code to have an easier implementation of your queries to the API. We have a suggested patterns for integration. It's also a document that explains, for example, how to do sync from scratch to your local database, or how to do incremental sync afterwards. And then we have also some samples. So if the documentation is not self-explanatory at some points, you can always go to those samples and try to just adapt what you find there. You need to authenticate with basic authentication. That's username and password that you will be registering with in the self-registration portal of EMA. As we mentioned, there are versions. Versions for now are V1 and V2. Of course, we are evolving the system, so eventually we will have different sub-versions on this 1 and 2. We have the standard resources, verbs, and representation that you can expect there. So the verbs are the HTTP ones listed down: post, put, get, and delete. We have the standard HTTP status codes. So for example, when the 200, it's when it's a good request. The failure is when it's 400, 500. We deliver the data in the standard formats like XML or JSON that you can eventually set in a header what would you prefer to read from it. And in some endpoints, you can find a CSV or a zip CSV file for big things. And yeah, that's pretty standard. In the industry, we have secure certificates to make the communication secure. Sometimes for the test environments, you might get some warnings because they might be self-signed by EMA. But as it's a test environment, the communication will be still secure because encryption will work with SSL. And it's just that you need to trust EMA as a signing authority. For production environments, that's all arranged with the usual signing authorities that are trusted by the operative systems. Yeah, and then for the rest here, we use pagination to request in different chunks the data, because of course we cannot do endless requests with endless responses. Sometimes the request will have a problem of validation of a content. So especially if they are complex requests, for example, posting a change request. So please check the examples. Maybe even use the web UI as an inspiration and try to find out how do we request our own API. The maximum results you can expect in a page is 1,000. And we always encourage that you try to make the most efficient use of the SPOR API by thinking on what information you really need, if you can narrow down your queries, and if you can just browse through the number of pages that you think they are relevant. Some tools that you could use, Postman will be showing it in a bit. We also like to use SOAP UI, which is having the same function. It lets you query the API with a very comprehensive set of parameters and configurations. You can beautify the answers that we give to make it more readable to the human eye with some online code beautifiers. And of course, you can use the web UI to query the data when you are implementing your application. So then you know what you shall expect in the responses of the system. What resources are there available? Well, we have in OMS, we have organizations and locations, which is it's also fully available in the web UI without being logged in. You can also submit change requests. Change request is when you want to either include a new organization or location, or when you want to ask for some data to be corrected. And then there's also documents there. For RMS, the basic resources there are lists and terms. So lists and terms of referentials. Then you have a lot of data associated to those terms and lists. For example, translations, documents, but you can also submit change requests, and that's basically the most important resources there. SMS, PMS are to come. Maybe Andre can give you some overview of it.
Yes, good morning. Thank you, Angel. I'm Andre Idu, the platform architect for the SPOR platform. The SPOR V2 API, which includes the APIs for PMS and SMS, is still under development, as was mentioned earlier. They use the FHIR standard for defining the data model and the RESTful API processes. This is the overview of the various FHIR resources that we use, which are also the endpoints of our APIs. More information on the PMS data model and the FHIR fields that are in scope can be found on the implementation guide for PMS chapter 2, which defines the data model. SMS uses just one FHIR resource substance definition. These APIs are not yet available to external users. They're only available internally for the EMA. We will share more information later in the presentation on the roadmap for these APIs. Thank you.
So let's start with the demos and the tips. Maybe before we go to the demos, just quickly mentioning, if you would like to know what is FHIR, you can just browse online. As we said, it's an international standard, and it was initially made to exchange healthcare records between healthcare providers, clinics, etc. And but it has been extended by time till the point that, for example, all your smartwatch will make some observations, for example, your heart rate or of your blood oxygen and so on, and send it to your phone. So this is the level of integration where FHIR is going. And then we are using, of course, some of the level 5, so the most abstracted or the latest abstracted from the beginning of FHIR resources. Yeah. So yeah.
One note here, we're showing the main page of the FHIR website. This is showing the latest major published version of FHIR, that is release 5. When the PMS and SMS APIs will be released to the external users, the version that we will support in the beginning is release 5 preview 2. We will have it on our roadmap to upgrade to the final version of release 5 somewhere in the future.
Thank you. So here we'll demo a bit. First, we'll start with OMS, then we'll go to RMS with some explanations in between. You will see now live with Postman how to query this. Here you have a little summary of what are we going to show there. So for example, how you put the parameters in the URL, that you have to navigate through pages of the response, that if for some reason there's a problem with your account, you will get a 401 error because you are not granted the access. But if the process is completed as described before, then you will not see that error anymore. And there's well, let's go to the demo and then we browse the rest later. So, for example, here, this is the endpoint for an. Let me show this a bit. When we want to browse the organizations and then check retrieve the data of one organization that we know the ID, then it's as simple as querying the URL This is all listed in the documentation. We'll go there in a bit. And then just specifying the organization ID and sending the request will give you all the data of this organization. What's the data of the organization? We can see here. There are different identifiers of the organization. There might be some locations in this organization. You can see here the locations. And then if you want to retrieve the data of those locations particularly, you can ask another endpoint that we will explore about the locations. What is interesting to point out here is that here you have the metadata. So you have the query that you have sent and so on, the timestamp of the query. And this becomes more important, for example, when we are navigating in pages. So for example, here we have this URL, this endpoint, the same organization's endpoint. We are submitting a query here. And then what are we saying? We say that we want to filter all the organizations with the name that is containing the word test in between the whole name of the organization. That's where the wildcard applies. Of course, you could do like this, and that would mean ending in test, or the other way around, beginning by test. So this is test in between of the word. We want pages sized by 50 by 50 organizations. And then we are querying organizations with the status active and inactive. We could be removing one part of it, and then there will be only inactive organizations. We could do the opposite, and then we'll get only active organizations. Then, because we are navigating in pages, because we are doing a search, we are having not only one result like we had before, we're having many. So we need to pay attention to the metadata. Let's send this. Because here it's telling us more things. For example, it's telling us that we have 22 items. So it's a single page. We are lucky for that. Because we have a page size of 50. You will have a smaller page size, 20, for example. Then we'll have the information about in which page are we, and so on. And then we'll use this to navigate. Here we see that with this URL, we could browse to the next page. Of course, you can see already that we are having the search token that is holding the results of your search. Then you are navigating with the page number. And then you could parse this answer, this response. You could use this link and then move to the next page and so on. Organizations have versions. Here in OMS, we are keeping track of the history of organizations. And this is something that you can request with versions true. So if you are interested in the historical data of one organization, you can just append this to the end of your query. And then you will have at some point in the answer, in the payload of the response, the section with the versions. And then you have the different versions of the organization as they were in the past specified. And also you have the metadata of when this version was created, and etc. And then you can have and see the next version to know when this version was superseded, and you can build up a historical of the system based on that. We mentioned.
Just to clarify one point on the pagination, to parse the response properly, you need to look for the next page attribute of the organization's response object. If we can go back, yes, thanks, to where we had a paging. No, I think we need to make the page size smaller for this. Mm-hmm. But I just wanted to clarify the name of the attribute is next page. Yes, we can see it now on top on the organization's object. The attribute is next page. And you can, so you don't necessarily need to process which page you're on. If the response contains this attribute, it means you have another page that you need to process, and you can continue doing that until the response does not give you a next page.
Yeah, also useful to mention that you have the total items mentioned in the same metadata. So to make your navigation, how many pages it should have, etc., you can just calculate all this with this data. We were speaking about organizations. You might see here, as we said, test. Now in this case, pages of 50, inactive, but you can also retrieve locations. For example, this is the data of the location with this ID. Every organization listed before has some locations. and then it's very straightforward to just get the location ID and query this content of the location. You will see many things in the location, for example, the address details of it. You will also see the timestamp on when this version was created, and so on. So there are the same attributes applicable, or mostly the same attributes applicable to locations and to organizations, where you can filter and define your query to request specifically what you want. So for example, you are interested in certain names, or you might be interested in asking for locations in certain postcode of a certain country. You can refine all that. So you don't need to get all the localizations and then later filter out the whole content of the database just to get the ones that you are interested on. You can really specify, and we encourage that to do it because it's also best for us to keep the system under the requested load. As you see, similar parameters. Here we are using this wildcard option in the organization ID. We're looking for active and inactive, page size 100. We are ordering by the org name, because you can also order if you are, imagine you are implementing some little UI where you want to see the information filtered in a specific way for the user to find the organization or location they are interested on. You can ask with those queries to the system. One point that is also very important when you want to synchronize and get data that has been only modified after some data, because you are doing upgrades of your local copy in little chunks, just with the most up-to-date data, let's say daily or hourly. You can append also the parameters to specify in between where you want this. So the organizations that were changing between certain timestamps, and then you will only retrieve that amount of data, and you will be needing to navigate only this amount of data. This is mostly all that we can show in OMS. This is Postman, the application that we mentioned before. And I don't know if Andre wants to add something else here.
Yes, what's not visible in Postman is the approach for authorization. So we're using basic authentication with the username and password passed in the authorization header, but that's not, we will not show that, so we don't expose anything to the outside world. And regarding the filtering on dates, that is also the preferred approach for integrating with our APIs. We will show the document in a little bit for the integration patterns. However, the main principle is you download first the current state of the OMS and or RMS data that you're interested in, and then you can query looking for only the modifications after the date on which you have last synchronized, and you can keep on iteratively doing that either every day or every week or every hour as well.
Since we're talking about documentation, let's quickly take a look, at least to have a grasp on how things are described there. So for example, this is a parameter that we mentioned that you can use to filter the locations. And here you have this timestamp with a specific format. So if you don't know that and you want to check the documentation when you are building your queries, this is the document that is hosted. Well, it's a local copy, but it's the one hosted in the technical section of the documents. Here is this SPOR API specification. And then, for example, here you have described all what we, more extensively, what we have summarized before in the presentation. So what are the HTTP methods? What are the data types that are flowing? And then you have a comprehensive list of the endpoints and the parameters that they can get as an input. For example, when this is for RMS, we'll show it in a bit. If we go to OMS, Organization Service, imagine we want to locations, we just did. We want to search for locations. And then here we have described how the parameter for the page size is specified, how we navigate the page, how we sort by, the options to sort the response by here, what is the search token, so to navigate from different pages with a standard search. You have many things. You can specify city, postal code, country. It's a very, very, very detailed number of parameters. And then if we search in the document, for example, for this one that we were using as a timestamp, you have this log modified after, so location modified after, and then here you have the format year, month, day, hour, minute, second. So you can always refer to this guide to find anything you want to specify correctly, or if you are not getting a good response from the system, it's probably because some parameter is not properly specified. So please refer to here or to the examples. You have also, as a corollarium of each section, a summary of an endpoint with a diverse number of parameters here. Andre was mentioning the integration patterns. This is another document that is listed in this page, SPOR integration patterns. And here we have some use cases that you can read. They are with diagrams, so it's a bit easier to understand that code snippets. And here you have, for example, how to synchronize elements. You have a problem statement where you made a local copy and then you want to do incremental updates of this local copy. So here we are giving you which endpoints shall be called and which operations that you can refer to in the documentation, and how should be the normal flow to do these updates. This is what we recommend for several reasons. You will be querying the exact data you need, so you will have less load in our system. You will cause less load, means that the system will be fully available for all the consumers. We are having many consumers, and we need as much as possible that you adopt the best practices. But also for you, you have the less load in your system, which will turn out in having not only cheaper hosting costs of your own applications, but also a better user experience, because you have to navigate and to filter through less data. So you will also give to the user of your system what really needs, and then you will make more error-proof your processes. We recommend this is a small document, as you see, and we recommend it also as a read before starting. Let's go back. This is what we've been showing. We've been showing how to append the parameters to the URL to specify what we really want. The number of organizations that can be retrieved on a single page is 200. This is how you would, they often come in 20 by 20, but you can define the page size as you want to retrieve only the amount of data you want. There's a special endpoint with special parameter, which is mentioned here, and it's a very important one, because page size 0, it might seem that it's not giving you any content in the body of the response, but it's actually giving you a full dump of the organizations or locations, containing, if you parameterize it with a whole versions of them. And this is what we encourage to use for initial syncs of systems, because this is a pre-calculated file that it's often rebuilt nightly. So you can start from there and then get and start querying the last changes that happened in the last day, for example. All right. Some attributes, as says here, can be found in multiple languages. And then when you find ORQ, that means that it's a change request. So it's still provisional. It's not been approved yet by the business team. We have a concept in OMS which is called merge, and merge is the counterpart of it. And that happens that because during the process of the business team to master the data, they might find that some organization has been created with a duplicate, or because, for example, some organization merges with another one naturally as a result of their own business merge. And then they will fusion in a golden record, but OMS is keeping track of all the history and also all the IDs. So what will happen is that when you're requesting the system, you might use either one of the two IDs that have been merged, and then you will get the same record back as a response. The main ID that will be returned by that record will be the one of the golden one that is mastering this entry, but inside the body, you will find both IDs specified, so you know it was a merge of those organizations. Any operation that you will do on the IDs that have been superseded by the new golden ID will be still returning the information that you expect. We have here a capture of it, so you can have an idea on, this is made on the web browser, which is also a tool that you can use for the simplest requests. And for example, we have the organization ending in 91 and the organization ending in 92. They have merged. And then inside the body, you might have that there are two identifiers for OMS, the 91 and the 92. This is in the first section of the body identifier section. If you go and you check the organization ID, you will see that the oldest one is the one that has survived. So this is the new golden record for the merged couple of organizations. Yet in the body, you will find out that there were two different organizations before by seeing two identifiers of OMS inside the identifier section. So you request 91, you will get 91 as a main ID. Inside listed is a merge from 91 and 92. If you query 92, you will get 91, which is the golden record, as a main ID, but inside you will find reference your ID. Here we have a little bit of pseudocode on how can you implement that in your local systems. So you can find every time you are doing the query that we specified before, this is for organizations, self-locations, to get the organization modified after a certain date or time. Then you can navigate if you are interested on detecting those merges and unmerges, you can just detect if the ID returned, the main ID of the response is the one that you have requested for. If it's the same one, you know you are in the master organization always. If it's not the same one, you know that that organization has merged. This is for locations. We were showing the slide before of organizations. Same rules apply to locations. So what we've been speaking about organizations can be also about locations. And of course, we spoke about a merge, but it also exists the concept of an unmerge. And then the unmerge is when the one organization and the one record splits and becomes two organizations. So you will find, as a result of that, two separate organizations. The original IDs will be split across the records, and the original IDs will be returned to the original organizations. This is normally used as a mean to correct mistakes while doing merge. This is not meant to be used when an organization split in two, because normally when an organization in the physical, no, in the real world, not in the OMS database, splits in two, one of the two organizations will keep the old ID and the other one will register new in the system. So this is only a technical action to undo a mistake done under a merge, either automatic or manual. Let's go to RMS. and repeat a bit what we have done before for OMS. But with RMS, you will see that many of the things apply as before. For example, regarding the metadata, how to browse different pages, and so on. Here is a limit of 1,000 items per page. It's a bit bigger than in OMS. So how does RMS request look like? RMS, as we said, is a set of lists, and the lists have terms. Those are the referentials itself. So when you know the ID of a list you want to query, you can just query the list as it is. It will give you a description of the list, and then it will give you a link on how to get the terms. The terms will not be explicitly set here. Here you have the information of the list itself. When you want to get the terms of a list, let's over here, you can just query this endpoint for terms, and then you have a list of the whole terms that are within the list. For example, age range. I don't know this list which one it is and which information is containing, but there are different lists of different scopes. Young animal. You can get a bit of a different information when you use the term summaries. So this is all these endpoints are listed in the API documentation that we showed before. Here is just a different way of browsing the contents of a list, and you can explore these contents in the web UI, as we said before. We showed for OMS, but RMS is also available there. And while you are applying for the API access, you can use the test environment to explore many of the terms and what they might have inside. For example, they also have short names. They might have translations, as we mentioned before. They might have a status. As we saw before, you have pages. This is the URL that will lead you to the next page. You have the total amount of items that you have retrieved by your query, and you have some other metadata that might help you to understand when the data was changed or when you have queried the data, etc. When you want to go in detail in a term, the path is straightforward. List, the list you want, terms, and then the term you want. Those are the terms IDs. And then here, for example, you find different translations of the term, which might be very useful when you are implementing a system that needs to be used for users of a country where you operate in your local language. You might also search in the list of terms by parameterizing, because we were showing how to get things by ID, but when you don't know the ID, when you have to explore what information is available in the system, you can use same format of queries that we showed before. This is also listed in documents, and you might specify a name for a term you want to look for. Before we were seeing that there was something, for example, you have here newborn infants. And then this has been shown here because we are saying we want all the terms that start with term, and then we're giving the wildcard as a joker to complete the rest of the word. If we would do like this, we would say containing term in between, because here the term is named in test term newborn infant, then it's appearing on the result. Here we are limiting the scope to the list with a list ID, but you don't need to do that. You can just search for terms in the whole system. That's also an option, and then you can later on show to which lists they belong, and then find the most adequate to fulfill your business case. Terms can be current or not. There's some different options that you can filter with. Once again, depending on what's the interest of of your business case, what you want to store, what you want to show to some user, etc. Please use the most accurate parameterization as possible. And here we have just as an example of a long query with different concatenated elements. We want the terms that either contain term in between of the name. We want them from status current, and then we want the pages having 100 by 100. This is a bit of a heavier query, so the system is taking a bit longer, and we might not want to wait for it to finish. But I like to emphasize here that all this is in the docs, like in OMS, same description, same examples, same formats. For example, status, which statuses can be there. You can find that in documentation as well. And authentication is the same one as before. Authorization authentication is based on your user password. You can specify it in Postman here or in the web browser. If you are putting this query in the web browser, it will ask you with a pop-up on what's your user and password, and then you will be able to retrieve the content.
One suggestion that we have from the audience on Slido is to show how we can download a CSV of the results. So I think we can explain that quickly. It's supported on all the endpoints. Okay, we have to see on within the documentation. So we support exporting CSVs in zip format, and for that to be enabled, the accept header should be specified as application zip. Yes.
Yes, yeah, I think it's useful to browse because depending if you are in OMS or RMS, you might have a little bit of a different, not header, but the endpoint supported.
Yes, exactly. So please check the different pieces of documentation for where this accept header is supported. Yeah, I think we can go to one of the searches for either organizations or locations, and then we change the accept header to zip.
Yeah, it will not be visible here in the Postman, but yeah, you can retrieve it by, and then as you see, it will be a zip file. No response. What do I say? And then you have a CSV of the organization content. Let's see if we can open it for yes. Here we have the data that it was shown otherwise in XML format, but exported as CSV and has been zipped. So if you have a query with a lot of results, that would be a very useful way to get all at once quick. It's compressed, so it will be downloading fast, and then you will be able to operate it in your own Excel most likely, or in your code editor or the tool that of your preference. All right, then we are back here. Some tips, something to mention about RMS is that not all the lists are maintained by EMA. Some lists have external owners, for example, the metadata list or the ATC list, and you can browse through them, but you might not be able to download all the elements at once because they have license restrictions. You cannot update a term, but you can always submit a change request. This is a general principle. The data is double checked by a team that ensures that is of the most quality. So not everything is, nothing is open on a change of an individual, but we are open to every suggestion. We are doing some optimizations. For example, the history of RMS might not be always returning the data of versions as expected, but this is something to be mitigated soon. That's it. With that, we conclude the demo. This time we have been using Postman to use a different tool. We have webinars published in the webpage in YouTube as well, where you can see the same demos that we have shown now, but using the web browser. So if you are more confident with the web browser, please feel free to browse those demos and check the same content that we have shown here.
Okay, I will do the section on the news about our SPOR API, and I will cover some of the information that has been requested via Slido as well. And we can also review after this the Slido questions. Feel free to add some more in the meantime. Right, so in 2023, we've been focusing a lot on increasing the reliability of the SPOR platform overall, and that means also for the SPOR API, and evolving our ability to ingest and to serve more throughput of data. Our current usual day is about serving 400,000 API requests on both OMS and RMS, and our user base is increasing, and all of these numbers are above the initial expectations for when OMS and RMS were released. We're taking all this information also into account for PMS and SMS, which are still under development, as mentioned before. So we're going to share information about the latest improvements that we've done this summer, how we're re-architecting SPOR and the APIs, and what has had impact on API users out of what we have improved. So actually, to start with the impact on users, on July 12th, we've rolled out a feature to rate limit API users. That was first rolled out on OMS endpoints for reading data of organizations and locations. So whenever doing a search on those endpoints or retrieving an organization by ID or a location by ID, we set out a maximum number of requests per minute. So the general limit overall was 1,000 requests, and per user it used to be 60 requests per minute. We have evolved that now. The limit is not for the entire OMS scope. So each endpoint organizations or locations has these specific limits. So you can retrieve 60 organizations in a minute or 60 locations and 60 locations in a minute simultaneously. We've also added this to the RMS endpoints for reading data such as lists and terms. However, the numbers, the limits themselves are quite high in the tens of thousands. The reason for putting that out is to be able to shelter the platform from users that are joining and maybe they're running tests and generating a lot of requests or through implementation that is not optimal. And in the past few months, we've identified a couple of those users, and this rate limiting feature has helped us to stay keep the system up while also contacting the users to try to understand what is their use case and help them build an implementation against the API that works for them and that allows us to scale. The requests for change requests, so the endpoints for change requests on OMS and RMS are unaffected. We don't have a lot of traffic there. What this means in terms of user experience, API user experience, is that once one of the thresholds is reached, the response is no longer a response code 200. We will see a response code of 429, which means too many requests. And one of the headers will let you know how many seconds the API client needs to wait before the next request will be allowed through. So this can be implemented programmatically on the client side to process this type of codes and headers, so that it doesn't error out when this type of response is encountered. You will always get a response, and yes, in this case you can ignore the response body. There's no usable information there. You can programmatically get the headers. So in our experience since July rolling this out, we've seen interesting patterns. We're looking here at a extract of a week. Don't really remember which month this was. However, you can see we've had about 1.8 million successful requests go through, and about a magnitude of 10% of that was rate limited, and that has helped us keep the system up. For instance, where we have these peaks in rate limiting. So that is probably a user that was making a lot of requests in parallel, or not necessarily processing the response with a delay, and then they encountered this. There might still be users that need to adapt their integration to have this working. We've communicated this in July in our previous webinars, and contacted all the API users by email. And we will continue to improve the documentation and the communication around this. As we evolve our underlying components to scale better, we will increase the limits per user and overall. So in practice, we will see less of the rate limit being reached. In the future, we will communicate about when these thresholds change. Alongside rate limiting, we were also able to introduce a feature for response caching. So whenever users request the same type of information over and over again, or whenever we have, for instance, web UI users that are browsing similar data, they can benefit from the fact that another user or themselves have looked at similar data before. And we will no longer need to retrieve that from on our underlying databases. We can respond from a cached version of that data. And in the past, yes, and this is a September screenshot. In this example of a week of traffic, we can see that we were able to respond from this cached version, this copy of the data, without hitting our databases for half of the requests that we were receiving. This has impact mostly on RMS. That is where we notice the most requests that are similar. So that has helped us to stabilize the platform a lot in the past few months. Apart from these two features, we're also looking into evolving the API architecture itself. In very short, our previous architecture was relying on a sequence of components working together to retrieve the data from the database, from the core database. We have now been working on an approach where we separate the reads and the writes. It is inspired by the CQRS pattern. So in order to serve data for reading it, which is more than 80% of our traffic, we will do that from a separate projection of our data and retrieve the data from a dedicated database, which stays in sync with our master database. This will allow us to scale a lot better than we have, and that this going to production will allow us to increase the rate limit thresholds as mentioned before. What we aim with refactoring or re-architecting the SPOR APIs is to keep the same experience for our external users. So the API contract remains the same endpoints apply, the same filters, the document, everything that is in the documentation will be supported, including the authentication mechanism. We are focusing on the organization endpoints first. Let me see if we can find my mouse. Yes. And we aim to roll that out by the end of this year. And in the beginning of the next year, we will extend that to the location endpoints. So we're really focused on OMS because we see that is where some of the highest resource needs in terms of compute and processing are today. We will then plan for a similar approach for RMS. Yeah, so what we expect is that the response times on the APIs, which are on average between 1 and 2 seconds, the response time should decrease to under 1 second, milliseconds. And we also aim to be able to serve requests through the API even when other components are going through maintenance and downtime. So for instance, if our backend for data stewards is under maintenance, then we can still serve the current versions of the data through the API, which is not necessarily the case today. Yes, so in terms of the roadmap, as I've mentioned, in 2023, we've focused on performance and stability. We're rolling out by the end of the year the first re-architected API for OMS, and we will continue with the rest of OMS and RMS next year. There have been some questions on SPOR v2. We will touch that on when we look at the Slido questions. So we aim to have SPOR v2 APIs ready for UAT this year. And based on the results of UAT, we will plan for the actual release somewhere in the beginning of next year. We will start with SMS and then PMS. We were opening these up to NCAs and industry, and the product owners for each stream will communicate to external users for any UAT interest. So please watch out for that. Overall, in 2024, as I mentioned, we're re-architecting the APIs, but we're also looking at other parts of the platform for improvements and for providing a better service to our business colleagues. And further down the road, for PMS and SMS, which are using the FHIR standard, we will look into supporting the latest version of FHIR, which was shown earlier by my colleague Angel. Just to know that this impacts other systems that use FHIR, and we want to synchronize our roadmaps for that, so that is part of the discussion that we're having next year, and when we try to clarify the plans and see when we can start the work for that. Yes, I think we can go to conclusions.
So to summarize a bit, we have been to this, well, initially towards an APN, etc., but especially in SPOR version 1, which is for OMS and RMS. We're going through the process on how to get your account approved. We browsed the documentation, pointed where it was. We have shown how the service desk is structured a little bit to give you an idea on how you can reach us and where are we posting our important announcements. The differences between version 1 and 2 also mentioned. We have gone through a set of examples on how to query the API. As you've seen, it's straightforward. It's not human readable, but it's pretty readable. Besides that, so we encourage you to experiment, especially when you are using our test environment. And we've given the tips and shown what are the preferred patterns for integration. Also, with a heads up on what's a merge and an unmerge, which especially the merge is a popular operation in OMS, and you might encounter it, and it might be important for your own processes. There's a single entry point on the service desk for both technical and business team. You can reach us there if you have any questions, although here in this presentation, we've tried to explain how to obtain access and so on. You can always log your question there, and we will be happy to help you and to support you. If, for example, the set of tests that you need to provide to get production access, it's not clear, please contact us from there and we will clarify it. And at the end, we've seen what we have done during this year, for example, with the rate limiting and the caching on the API. We've shown what it's the short-term evolution that we are planning regarding the new API component for OMS and later to come RMS, and then shown a bit of the roadmap or the near future of SPOR, which is still unclear, but we are working on it to make it more concrete. So I think it's time for some questions. Let's see if everything was clear or everything was confusing.
So please join on slide on the quiz side. We will have a few questions regarding the content of today's presentation to understand if our communication has been clear enough and to see where we can improve. We will wait a few minutes for people to log in. In the meantime, hello, Josef, Mirela, Thomas, Fabien, and everybody else. Mr. Test or Mrs. Test. Okay, last chance to join before we enable the quiz questions. Hello, Doru, Bella. Okay, I think we can proceed.
For what kind of integration is an API ideal for? Human integration, machine integration, animal integration, or API is something else that is not an integration? There's 15 seconds left. Andrei, what's your guess?
Well, I doubt it's animal integration. Maybe human, but yeah, my bet is on B, machine integration. There we go.
Well,
okay, we can argue that API does not offer any integration on its own.
That's correct. That's also true because yeah, the API is exposing you a set of opportunities, but it's not giving you anything done by itself. So you need to build integration. Indeed, machine integration is the preferred use case. Yes. What format can be the SPOR API message representations? So we've been showing some. We've been mentioning others, and there was a request to see how to get zipped CSV. Let's see if it was too boring to keep the attention, or if you
Or we might have skipped too fast over it. Let's see.
Well, I think we might need to clarify. Of course, most of you said all of them all true. But yeah, we've been showing mostly XML, and we mentioned a few times that JSON is available because JSON is normally the preferred format for developers, although XML is the classic format, let's say. We've got an example of a zip CSV just because it's extremely practical in certain cases, especially if there's a lot of data. So yeah, all the maybe emphasize next time better on this point. What is the maximum number of orgs or logs returned by an API call on a single page? 10, 20, 50, 200.
Actually, I think we might have had an interesting piece of information on the slides that we might need to correct. Because the correct answer is 200.
Mm-hmm.
Well, our slide said 1000.
Yeah, it said 1000 for RMS items, so lists or terms, and that's correct. I think in that slide we're talking about the maximum of the SPOR API. So the maximum will be in RMS with 1000, but indeed in OMS is 200.
Okay.
So 50, I think we might have been using it. It's a beautiful number, but we allow for a little bit more. So you need to browse through a lot of information. You don't need to make a lot of queries to us, no? Because when you retrieve 200 at once, then that will be the equivalent to 4 pages of 50. So eventually, if you need the data, the best is to go in the biggest chunk, and then 200 is the best compromise we found in our system. This is one of our favorites. In order to retrieve all organizations in a single API call, so no pages, just one API call, how do you get that? If you can. Maybe you can't. Maybe 1000, it's a very big number, so everything will fit in. Or maybe just say no page size. Indeed, page 0 is the one, a little bit of a counterintuitive parameter, but it's a very special case of the API. That's why we wanted to make this question here. Although 1000 is a big page size, but bear in mind that the limit for organization is 200 per page. So even if you specify a page size of 1000, you will only get 200. There are few thousands of organizations. I don't remember from the top of my head now. So it's still more than 1000. It would not fit in such a hypothetical page size if it would be available. Page size 0 will give you this stream with the whole content of the database. And the last one. We've been speaking about the operations of read and write on the API. So how can you write a term? How can you update a term in the RMS API? You can use the ID. It's not possible. You can do it with the API, but not with the web UI. You can have to search and then later resend again. How is the mechanism to achieve that? Okay. So we've seen that only 10 people have participated. Maybe it's a bit of a tricky question, but indeed it's a fundamental principle of SPOR that the data has to be verified by people. And for that reason, no user can submit a change, but you can submit a change request. So you cannot update a term via the API, but you can submit a change request via an API and also via web UI. If I imagine in most of the cases when we want to submit a change request, it's
it's not some operation that we automate because it's not something that happens commonly. So we just encourage you to log in the web UI and just submit the change request there because it's much simpler. While to implement the API call for that can be more laborious. So we have a winner.
Okay, congratulations, Josef, for answering the fastest. It is not a competition. Thank you to everyone for answering. Yes. So we are now going to go over some of the questions we received via Slido. Yes, and all right, let me just start one more.
Yeah, we'll first answer ones we have picked because we think that maybe are completing what we said. Then we'll go to the most rated ones. And let's see if we have time to answer everything.
Yeah, so Stefan Picard is asking when the SPOR v2 API for PMS will support FIRE R5. FIRE R5 having been released in March of this year. So as I mentioned, we're still developing the PMS API with the aim to have a UAT started this quarter. We're still on the FIRE version mentioned also in the implementation guide for PMS, and that is R5 Preview 2. We aim to release the API supporting this preview version, and we still need to make the plans for starting support on R5. This actually means we will have to support the existing version and the final R5 version of FIRE. We're also receiving or aligning requirements together with our colleagues in the EAF portal and with UPD, which are still both not on the major R5 version. So we will need to also coordinate with them in terms of roadmap, with the best outcome being that that all the three projects support the final R5 versions at the same time.
Can we have two applications, for example, Viva and MDM querying the EMA database for fetching SPOR data? The answer is yes. Even with a single user, you can query both at the same time. Of course, you have to bear in mind that there's those rate limiting. So you might want to have more than one user for that from different members of your organization. But if you are falling under these rate limiting limits, then of course there's no problem with that. Do you need to whitelist the API address? You have to do that only for the test environment. So when you are applying for production access, you need to have whitelisted the IP of, let's say, your office, or you are developing this solution. Once you have proven to us, following the whole process, that you understand the SPOR API, then you have production access, and for that it's open. You don't need to whitelist your IP. So if you are using any other provider, maybe cloud provider, etc., where it's complicated to know from which IP that's coming, it's fine because production is available.
I will take the next one. So Bruno is asking, is the plan to have V1 and V2 merge into a single API one day? If yes, when? If not, is it planned to use more meaningful names? Let me start with the last one. Yes, indeed, we can understand the confusion between V1, V2, and what is the scope of each of these versions. With PMS and SMS being almost ready to be released, we will also adapt these webinars to include information about how to use those APIs and how to register for them. Yes, thank you for the feedback. We will start using more the names of the different data streams more than their versions. Having said that, V1 and V2 are the current major versions of the APIs. we're looking into modernizing the authentication approach for RMS and OMS, and also whenever we will start support for Fire version R5. These are major changes that we will do, which mean we need to increase the version. So we will probably consolidate everything towards a higher version somewhere in the future, next year or the year after that. But in terms of communication, we will start using or be more precise on which APIs we're referring to. We have here, I started a question which is more of a business question, not that technical, but I saw the answer from my business colleagues. So the question is, if you have already registered an organization in OMS with a specific address, is it possible to create a new organization on the same address? The answer is yes. As long as documentation providing information on the use of that address for the specific organization is provided. I hope I answered that correctly on behalf of my business colleagues. Okay, another question on Fire. I'll take that. So yes, this question is about when can we expect Fire XML from EMA for PMS, similar to extended vigilance medicinal product report message XML file for machine-to-machine exchange. So the PMS API will be released soon to be able to share the data that we have in PMS at the EMA. So we have data from our internal systems and from XCVMPD by basically feeding EVPRM, XCVMPRM messages to PMS. And the API will also evolve in terms of process and information that it can share with users. And I encourage you to follow the product lifecycle management value stream updates. That is where the PMS stream sits in at the EMA since we have adopted the Scaled Agile framework. So within that value stream, there will be updates on the releases for PMS and on processes to use the API and further.
Can EMA communicate downtimes of SPOR UAT environments to industry and software vendors? Well, that's this is something that normally because the service of SPOR is open to anyone. We don't have, although we have the URLs of the people with API access, but mostly for prod, for UAT, anyone that starts the process to get the API access, get access to UAT. So we don't really know who are the total users of this environment. It's very difficult to have this proactive communication. And EMA, by standard, because it has many different platforms, doesn't communicate on the pages the downtime of the lower environments or the test environments. So the answer, unfortunately, is not. But on the other side, with the new work that we are doing with the API components, we can assure that the uptime that we are targeting for the prod will be also closely followed by the UAT environment. It's also for EMA of the interest that the UAT environment is available, because we have a lot of internal systems integrating with SPOR that also need this test environment alive. So we are just decoupling the data that we serve in the API from the core, which is the cause of most of the downtime now. So we cannot communicate that, but we'll have much less downtime. And if we have downtime, it will be possibly out of working hours, just to not affect the other consumers of EMA. The next one about the process. Yes, the process to request access explained today is only for the version 1 of the API. It's a process that is live for years. And eventually, if there's an evolution to OAuth 2, that this the way that we are envisioning for PMS and SMS or version 2, it will change and it will be aligned with that one. So we'll have the same process. But that's still far away on time. And when PMS and SMS or version 2 is available, then we'll communicate in a webinar what's the exact process to request access. And then the last question.
Yeah, so this is one that I started last, which is related to one of the quiz questions. So can you update OMS via API? Well, the answer is yes. However, we need to understand the concept of being able to update data in OMS and in RMS, as explained by how that works through the concept of a change request. So an API user can request a change on OMS data. That request will then be processed by one of our data stewards. And if approved, that will actually end up in an update to the OMS record that was requested to be changed. That is the process. A note taken to maybe improve the slides so we can have this a bit more clear for the next webinar. Let's look. Yeah, so there are other questions which were not starred. Some of them are similar to questions we've already answered. So can we have multiple user IDs for getting the SPOR data? The answer is yes. Our recommendation is to use only one, but if you have use cases where you do need multiple, you can register each one of them and go through the same access process that we explained.
There's also, in case you want more than one, if you still have a record of the old ticket submitted to get the first user of your organization approved, you can refer to that to make the process a bit simpler. Because then we understand that you know how to use the SPOR API, so you don't need to submit the test cases.
Okay, and a new question. Is it possible to submit directly to RMS and OMS from your RIM system? We have already integrated the RMS CSV lists with our RIM, so regulatory information management system. The answer is yes, however, you still have to follow the change request process. So please refer to the SPOR API specification for understanding the endpoints and the data model for submitting change requests via the API. Yeah, if all the data and documentation is submitted alongside the change request, that can also be done programmatically from an information management system.
Which EMAs on APIs were addressed in the presentation? We've been discussing mostly about OMS and RMS, version 1 of the SPOR API. And within EMA, the other systems, other APIs, and even within SPOR, the version 2 that we mentioned that will come in the future. But here, it's mostly about. Next question, just answered very close to the previous one. Yes, you can integrate these APIs with your local systems. You will need a user. So still follow the process to get a user, and then you can integrate it with it.
Okay, and I think we're reaching the end, and this was the. Oh, okay, there was also the suggestion to show the CSV exports there. Yes, we've showed that. So thank you for the suggestion, and thank you for all the questions and the interest from everyone. Yes, we also have the last part for today to fill in the survey.
Yeah, it would be very good to get feedback from you on how you found out the the presentation, if it was what you were expecting, or if you are missing something. If you like it, please be generous with your comments, and yeah, like and subscribe.
Well, even if you didn't like it, please be generous with the details on
that's
how we can
correct.
improve.
That's correct. Yeah. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. It's maybe a bit more of a drier presentation than the others you've seen this week, because it's a bit more in depth in the technical details. But yeah, I think, or we hope it's useful. It's useful, and then now you have learned something new about SPOR.
So, dear participants, thank you very much for attending this last webinar of this series. We will repeat them again next year, so stay tuned. And we will also look carefully at the feedback you provide us to bring some changes and improvements to the way we run the webinars. So thank you very much, and see you at the next webinar.